أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Getting to the Heart of Cancer. I am Dr. John Wadude Laird, your host. This episode is part two in our Sacred Sound interviews. The first part was on the healing properties of Quranic recitation. And be sure to listen to that episode first before you listen to this one. Part two is focused on the healing properties of the divine qualities, or the names of God, as it's been called in the Sufi tradition. This interview will be with Ibrahim Jaffe, but in terms of the video recording, this interview came right after the interview I did with Mohamed Moosa, and that's where we pick it up now. What Mohamed just recited was the verses from Surah Al-Hashr, and I wanted to read what Sidi's written about the recitation. As you may remember from our earlier discussion, these are the beautiful names of God, the divine qualities like love and healing and strength and power. And here's what Sidi's written about it. Healing by the beautiful names of God. And this is in the book Gift of Healing, again, page 20. There is a wonderful way to heal by the beautiful names of Allah. Each of Allah's names has power, influence, and transparency. You must choose the name that fits your case. For example, Allah's name Al-Ghani, the self-sufficient or the rich one, is used to cure poverty and need. Allah's name As-Salam, the peace, is used to cure anxiety, worry, and depression. Allah's name Al-Qawi, the most strong, is used to cure all types of illnesses. Allah's name Al-Bari, the maker, is used to cure all types of diseases, and so on. You should keep repeating any of Allah's names often until healing is granted. This is in addition to reciting the surahs and the ayats of the Qur'an that we recommended previously. There is no particular number recommended for invoking any of Allah's names, but the more you call the name, the faster healing is granted. So I think this is a beautiful introduction to, I want to go back to Dr. Jaffe's office in Northern California, and we're going to have a discussion about how to use the names to bring healing. So here I go. Ibrahim Jaffe, welcome back to Getting to the Heart of Cancer. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you, Dr. Laird. Happy to be here.
Earlier in the series, you gave some initial insights into the use of what we call in our tradition the names of God, sometimes called the qualities or the divine qualities, and their use in healing. So I invite you, let's continue with that discussion and help us understand more deeply what is the role that these names play in healing. And how can people use the names to support their own healing process?
Yeah. Okay, well, these are all, very good questions. In my understanding, as a healer, the names are the essential part of healing. That everything we're doing ultimately circulates around these names. In fact, so we could say that the names are the sun of healership, and everything else are sort of the planets that help to illuminate the sun or be illuminated by that sun. So for me, everything that I do personally is to, essentially wake up the names, is a way of saying it, or return the names. So if you think about this, first of all, what are the names themselves? And, the names are essentially descriptions that God has given about itself regarding what it is. Okay, so God says, I am compassionate, Al-Rahman, I am mercy, Al-Rahim, I am forgiveness, Al-Ghafur, I am love, Al-Wadude, and things like this. So there are, we say, the 99 archetypical names. And then, of course, there are many other names And there are discussions about, how many there are and what they are and so forth, which we won't go into. But generally speaking, we can say that as a rule of thumb, it goes 99, it goes 3,000. So we say there's 99 names, and then there's 3,000 names that are there. But anyway, these are irrelevant in the sense that these 99 are the master archetypes. And the way I always hold it is, if you look at white light and you take it through a prism, it breaks it into the rainbow. Well, in the same way, if we take the essence of God and we put it through a prism, which is essentially the act of creation itself, is the prism, it breaks it into these 99 names. So these 99 names are the 99 essentially striations or rainbow aspects of creation. And then, of course, within each level, there are probably infinite variations. So within the name of Rahman, compassion, there are many, 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 many types of compassion. So, there are, in the Sufi tradition, we hear stories about the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, speak about, for example, fire. And he said that there are 70 types of fire, and yet we only really know one of them here on the earth. So what are all these other types of fire? What are all these other types of Rahman that are out there? Well, as Sufis and as people, we are learning compassion, and we could say, is there really an intelligence of compassion? I think there is, which is that we could say, compassion doesn't matter, you either have it or you don't, which is how many people look at it. Or you could say compassion can be developed, which I believe is the truth. And then the final statement, you could say that God actually wants us to be compassionate, and the spiritual development of the human being is to become compassionate.
And that's the name Rahman.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Which in this tradition, that's a preeminent name that Allah describes itself with, above all else, on the Rahman. So it would make sense that for the human being, our journey is in part around, well, what is, and you said returning the quality. So what would be an example of someone who has illness or difficulty in life that's around Rahman that hasn't been returned, or what is return, and how might it play out with the quality of Rahman?
Yeah, well, this is the whole gist of the healing, I think. And again, it goes back to this concept, which is that if we believe that God is seeking for the human being to spiritually return to the presence of God, and in our tradition, what we understand, the only way that you will get to the presence of God is through taking on divine qualities. In other words, if you're not loving, how would you get to heaven? Heaven's a place of love. If you're not full of love, how are you going to get through the door? If you want to get into the presence of the highest levels of divinity, you have to carry certain qualities that allow you entrance into the presence of divinity. So again, in Sufism, we would say that God has created the human being to return to the highest presence. God wants us to return to the highest presence. But to do that, we have to earn our way in through developing the divine attributes that get us through the door. So what are we developing? In other words, do we not have compassion? Well, the truth is that as a child, we did. When we were born, if you look at a baby, it has great compassion. But the baby doesn't hold the compassion. Why not? Something breaks that compassion, inside the baby. And the baby kind of falls down. So, excuse me.
That's okay. I'll say for our viewers that this interview is being done during the month of Ramadan, where we're fasting from food and water, so the throat gets dry. So yes. That's fine. To clear your throat whenever you need to. That's fine.
Yeah, excuse me, everyone. So, as the baby loses its compassion, it has something very pure, which I call the bud. It has the bud of compassion, and it's like a pure, innocent bud. But through life's experiences, the bud closes down. What happens is the child gets hurt. Sometimes the hurts are very simple. It could be a big brother or big sister tormenting the child or hurting the child in some way, but the child loses the compassion. And as it loses the compassion, it takes on other things which are not compassion. So it still has compassion in it as a bud, but the compassion hasn't flowered as a flower. But you see, to get back to God, you actually have to flower the bud of compassion, because if you don't have a certain opening of that level of compassion, you won't access the return to God. You won't get back to the presence of God. Okay, so the spiritual journey is essentially coming back to the presence of God, and it is through taking on attributes such as compassion and love and peace and mercy and kindness and goodness and many other things that we return to God. So all systems of spirituality essentially are developing attributes. So they're all about attribute development. For example, we say Sufism is the path of the heart, the path of love. So it's very deeply a path of love, but it's also a path of the 99 names. So we're trying to develop all 99 of these qualities, as opposed to maybe one or two of them, where we're seeking all 99 development. And all of them are necessary, and there are ones that are more masterful than others, such as compassion and love. These are some of the super, inclusive ones that are necessary for the return. But you really need all of them to have the ultimate return.
So going back to our earlier interview in this series, where we talked about Sufism being a path of purification and beautification, when the Rahman or the compassion gets blocked, then you said the other things that come in could be judgment, defensiveness, aggression, collapse, whatever. Those are the qualities that, if not attended to, can be causative to disease in your experience, if these things are not purified out.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes.
And then when they're purified out, and we could maybe talk a little bit about maybe recitation of the qualities to help in the purification process. When they're purified out, then you get this experience we talk about, beautification, which is this flowering of the bud that you're talking about.
Yes.
Okay, so give us a sense about how someone might use a recitation of a quality, or how you as a healer might use the recitation of a quality to support this purification and beautification process.
Well, let me go before we jump to that, which is a fast jump, and I think that some of the people listening might need to have a little deeper understanding of the process, and then we can do some recitation. I'm happy to. But, again, I just want to be really clear for everyone that my experience as a healer now for 30 years, working on the subtle levels, is that in essence it's the turning away from the qualities that is responsible for manifestation of disease. Okay, in fact, not only just disease, but our entire lives. That, in other words, if we don't act from compassion, there are consequences from the lack of compassion being acted upon in our lives. In other words, if we don't act from, we say, tauba or repentance, there are consequences for the actions of not acting on tauba. One of the qualities of God is at-tawab, which means repentance. So, for example, if you make a mistake and you go before a judge, and you are not penitent, and the judge doesn't feel penitence, your sentence is going to be much stronger than if you show up to the judge and you say, I'm really, really deeply sorry about this, then the judge will bring penitence to you and probably forgive your situation. So, you see, we create our lives from this relationship to these qualities. Now, in the case of cancer is a very complicated disease. I say it's a soul disease, because it is any disease that can create death has to be a disease of the soul, because the soul is what gives life. So if it can take the body, then it is a soul level disease, because it can take the life. So cancer is a disease of the soul, which means that if it's not resolved, the soul leaves. Okay, and that means there's death. Okay, so of course the soul will go on, and that's another story. But the bottom line of it is that the ability to resolve the issues that are going on inside the cancer can change the cancer very deeply. So let me give you some examples of this. There was a man I worked with who had been a patient at MD Anderson, which is one of the big cancer clinics down in Houston. And he called me. He was from out of this country and had cancer in his lower body, and he asked me if I could help heal him. He was in exquisite pain from the tumor. And we began working. And my approach was about the qualities, which was essentially to try to find what bud had closed and how we could open it. And what we found were that the issues were about his father, and that he somehow felt diminished, and that he never felt that he could illuminate himself. Like under his father's strong hand, he always felt that he was in survival. He always felt that he wasn't safe. So there was issues of safety, there was issues of being able to illuminate himself, there was issues of abundance. Even though he was a very wealthy man, he never felt wealthy because he had grown up always feeling that there was lack of abundance. So these qualities were working inside of him. Well, when we began to find the qualities, and we began to find the things that were blocking that from expressing itself, we were able to wash them using the recitation with these names. And as we washed those problems out of him, so he no longer felt diminished, he no longer felt whatever, we started seeing changes in his system. First of all, the pain went away. And then unfortunately, or in some ways fortunately, but unfortunately, about 3 weeks into the healing process, he had a tumor that had encompassed his duodenum and had closed it down, and they had put a stent through it to keep it open. So they put a metal stent in so that the tumor couldn't close it. And what happened was that the intestine ruptured, and he bled, so they had to go in for emergency surgery. Well, interestingly, what happened is that this was only 3 weeks down the road. When they opened him up, they found that the tumor had disappeared in the 3 weeks. That the reason it broke was that without the tumor pressing on it, the metal broke through the intestinal wall, and that's what caused the perforation. You see? So it was a really incredible story of how working through the issues, which is the purification, helping the bud to come out, to be able to be reflected as the beautification with the divine name. In other words, that the compassion came out, the love came out, the certainty came out, the surety came out, and that he started holding these things as his reality. The tumor disappeared in 3 weeks. So this is
beautiful. Beautiful.
Okay, so this is the gist of my understanding of spiritual healing. We're trying to basically unveil the quality in the person that they manifest it. They need to manifest that quality. And the whole art of spiritual healing is nothing more than really getting clear what God's asking. What are those qualities? What are the veilings of those qualities? And how do we transform them? And that's how you heal cancer. It's through doing that exact thing. And now we've done this with many people, and the results have been actually fairly astounding. In that, when enough of this work is done, there's two things that happen. The first thing that we often see is there simply is a shrinking away of the tumor. The second thing, which is more exciting but more not as common, is that at some point this brilliant light of God, like a sun, appears and just comes down and washes through the tumor, and the tumor just literally disappears in that moment. And those are the two ways that it shows up. So in whatever way we look at it, the spiritual healing has incredible power through the magic of these names to create change at a physical level. And I'm going to give you just one more story before we talk about some recitation. But just recently, just in fact in the last 48 hours, one of my students called me, she called me about a week ago, and she had unfortunately gone into, she had a gallbladder surgery a few months ago. And by mistake, the surgeon had not only taken out the gallbladder, but had clipped the hepatic duct as well. So the liver has a duct that goes out, the gallbladder has a duct, and the liver duct is supposed to connect into the intestine. Well, the surgeon made a mistake, and he cut both. So what happened was all the bile everything coming out of the liver was essentially being dumped into the surrounding space and not going into the intestine, which was causing her incredible pain. And she was, barely able to tolerate it. That she was, I don't know if she was on morphine or not, but she was in a lot of pain. So she called me, and we began working on these issues. And they were, concerned, very concerned about the inflammation around the duct from all the bile and whatever came out. That to reattach the hepatic duct was going to be very difficult. So I said to her, well, these are all metaphors of something else. So in other words, you have this experience where you got cut, and you have this experience of inflammation, and you have this experience of pain, but these are metaphors of your spiritual journey. So what's the metaphor? So what we found was that essentially, in a very deep way, she had cut off from life, and that because people had been cutting to her. And I could understand this, because if you had heard the story, you would have cried. But it was a very profound story of suffering that she'd been through. And but she understood it, and she broke through to compassion. And by the way, the liver is one of the seats of compassion in our body. It comes up very much out of the liver. And then she started working with these other issues about the pain, and she was in tremendous pain emotionally and psychologically with something that was going on in her life recently about a relationship that had ended. And so we worked through the issues of the pain. This was, again, one session for the cutting. I think all this happened in about an hour and a half. And then the third piece was something else that we worked through. Now I can't remember what it was, but we got through these pieces in this hour and a half, and there was tremendous, tremendous release. And tremendous release of the pain, tremendous release of the hurt around the cutting, tremendous release. And in replacing of it, she found the compassion and found tremendous wisdom and understanding and depth and the ability to hold all the bad things that had happened to her. It was a profound level of movement for her that happened. Well, she goes in for surgery the next day, literally the next day, and they opened her up and they were shocked. They said that there was not one drop of inflammation anywhere, which was like unheard of. There was no inflammation. The ducts were perfect, and because of that, they were able to do a perfect surgery, and everything got brought back together in a perfect way. There's no problem. So again, if you think about, cancer is a metaphor for the difficulties that are going on inside of you, and my experience, not always, but my experience is that if we can get to those places and resolve them, that we have the greatest chance for your healing to occur, both either from the fading away of the cancer, from that startling explosion of cancer, of light that takes it, or the other third possibility, which is also we see frequently, is that simply all of a sudden the chemo starts to work. All of a sudden the surgery starts to work, where before they didn't think it would. Now they take it and it's done. Or they give you the chemo and it works. We had a case recently where exactly that happened. The chemo wasn't working, and then they did the work, and all of a sudden they went in and the chemo worked. So it's this change that happens through this process, and that's the value of these names.
Beautiful. Would you care to give us a sense of the recitation process?
Sure. So for me, again, when I work with people, I spend time really seeking out these names. And it's still not a science in the sense of I have to work at it. I don't always know what they are, and it takes time to work them out. I frequently think they're one thing, and they turn out to be something else. So it's a science that takes time to get to what they are. But let's say that it becomes a Rahman, which is very common for liver disease. Any hepatitis, cancer, whatever it might be, Rahman is very common. So once the quality is there, I pray to God to open up the world of that quality. And when that happens, my experience is that I'm transported into another reality. So I might say, I always start with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the merciful and the compassionate. And then I go and I ask and I make dua, I pray, I say, my Lord, please bring this pure light to this person. Please bring it into them. And then the key here is actually, for me, witnessing. I find that if I ask, but I don't, if I ask, some light comes. But in the state of conscious witnessing, the light expands tremendously. So there's a state of witnessing that goes on, meaning that in the inner world, that it seems that the experience of actually being able to witness and see that the descent of light has impact on it. Once we make these requests, but what's the difference? By simply asking, my Lord, please bring the light, maybe we see like a 20% increase in the light. But if I witness it, maybe I see an increase of 70%. So there's a vast difference in that state. Once this recitation begins, now what we do is we bring this quality into the tumor. And once the light goes into the tumor, it begins to mix with the tumor itself. And then there are ways, to actually sort of exponentially move forward that mixing process with the transformation of what's going on in that tumor. So the light comes in, and you mix it, and you transform the tumor. Now, for our purpose here, because that's a very complicated process of learning and watching and understanding, essentially simply by making the recitation. So if I say, Ya Allah, O God, Ya Rahman, O compassionate one, and I simply recite that, and that light will begin the process of mixing and moving in that tumor. And the more I say it, the more it mixes. The more I witnesses, the more powerful it is. The more you actually learn to simply work with it, almost to co-direct it, the more, and know where to move it, then you get your really powerful movement of transmutation of the tumor itself. So again, just to do recitation, we would say, Allah Ya Rahman, Allah Ya Rahman, Allah Ya Rahman, and you see, I'm working with this quality to really bring forth transmutation of what's going on in there. I'm working with it. Allah Ya Rahman, 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 Allah. See, now that was enough to move maybe one aspect of what I call the onion levels of a tumor. A tumor has many, many onion rings. So you continue to move it. But again, really the deep key is the ability to access into those layers consciously, and to be able to understand what goes on in there, and to be able to understand what's needed for the qualities to actually be able to do the mixing and the purification. So this is how it works. And I will say that anybody who wants to learn this process, if you're a person who wants to be a healer, I believe, and of course this is my personal belief, that healing from God, I don't think there can be any higher form of healing. In other words, I think God's the end of the road. I don't think we go past God. Some people might say, well, there's eternal emptiness, and that may be the case, but for me that's still an aspect of God. And for me, that God is the end of the road. So in other words, that the highest we're going to reach is not the angels, and it's not the ascended masters, and it's not the the prophets and these type of things. So all of these are people who are really capable of bringing forth this this type of godly light. But the bottom line of it is that going to God, we say La ilaha illallah, there's only God. This has to be the primary source of everything we do. And then once we've gone to God, then God will distribute that light through Jesus, or through Mohammed, or through the angels, or through even the healer themselves, because God chooses to do that. So our first step is that returning to the pure presence of the divine light itself. And if you are wanting to learn this type of healing, this is the healing work that we as Sufis are teaching, and there are different ways for you to learn this work, and we can talk about that as we go forward.
While we're on this topic, the Sufis use the name for God, Allah, and sometimes people, at least in Western culture, that's sort of a name that's very triggering. And but I think it'd be helpful to describe really what is this name and where does it come from, and you could say the benefits of using that name for God. One could say there's many names for God in this particular tradition. We use Allah. What is your perspective on that?
Well, I think this is a misunderstanding in the West, that people believe that Allah belongs to the Muslims. And Allah is a much vaster name than only for the Muslims. In other words, Jesus, which appeared prior to the advent of Muhammad, used the name Allahu. So when Jesus spoke about God in his Aramaic language, because Jesus essentially spelled Aramaic and maybe Hebrew, he spoke and he said the name of God was Allahu. Now, for Christians, I think it's very important for you to understand that that is the name Jesus used for God. So if you're really following your faith in the way of Jesus, then you would use the name Allahu. For Muslims, of course, Allah is a name you're familiar with and a comfortable name. And I think for many people around the world, they may not be familiar with the Aramaic language, which became Arabic and Hebrew through time. But we do know that first there was Aramaic. By the way, Sanskrit is almost identical in many ways to Aramaic. So Sanskrit and Aramaic are very similar languages. And then Aramaic split into Arabic and into Hebrew, which kind of became the founding fathers of monotheism today. Now, Allah simply means Al means the, and La means God. So Allah means just the God. And so God is saying, I am the God. There is no God but me. Worship no God other than me. These are the statements of monotheism, which is the statements of there is no God but the one God. So don't put false idols in front of me. It's a very religious thing. But from a point of view of understanding, if God is the essential light that we're returning to, and we put a false idol in front of it, such as money, and we start to worship money, or we start to worship our physical forms, we're actually blocking that divine light. And that's what God's saying. God's saying, come to my pure presence, which is the God, and through that pure presence, I will give you graciousness. I will give you blessings that are beyond anything you could know. And one of those blessings is the miracle of healing cancer, the miracle of very deep disease disappearing. That's the blessings of God. This is the graciousness of God. So when we say Allah, we're really saying return to the God. Come to the God. It is not necessarily religious at all, in the sense that as a Christian, you have to return to God. As a Muslim, you have to return to God. As a Jewish person, you are in the process of returning to God. All the monotheistic faiths are returning to the one God. And in fact, most of the polytheistic ones are also, but they go through a little bit different route, but their goal is the same. In Vedanta or in Hinduism, they are trying to reach to the one God. Enlightenment is nothing more than the light of the one God opening up inside somebody's mind. You know, the unity is the light of the one God opening inside of your heart. Divine healing is the light of the one God and the attributes washing away your disease. So, returning to God and the returning and the polishing of the attributes and the understanding of sacred language is a very important part of your healing process.
In Sufism, we say the name Allah is the same as the thing named. And that's a deep mystical statement. First of all, there's no word that's the same as the vastness of God. But this name Allah is even more than just the God in terms of what it carries on the inner. Can you share your experience or understanding of really what's in that name? It's not a random name, you could say. It's not it's generic in the sense that it's universal, but it's rich and has many dimensions within that name, Allah.
Yes. Well, again, you know, if we go into the world of divinity, you know, if you think about there's creation, and then there's kind of a line, and then there's divinity. So the heavens are part of divinity, and creation is what's below it. And so if you think about kind of striations of existence, you have creation, you have this line, you have the heavens, you have a line, and you have God, who essentially sits above all of it, kind of ruling all of it, meaning that his will has the ultimate authority over both the heavenly worlds and the creative worlds. Okay, so within that world, every level has a name. In other words, there are sacred names that are resonant with that level. In other words, every level has a sound vibration that comes out of that level. That level has sound, and sound is that level. So remember, the first thing that was created was the Word. You know, there was light and there was the Word. So God says, you know, I created out of darkness light, which is creation, and I created the Word. He brought forth the sound vibration into form. So my experience is that the sound vibration is the creation. In other words, if you have the right sound, you have the thing. The thing is the sound, and the sound is the thing. They're identical. They are of each other. So when you use sacred sound, what's happening is you are accessing sacred light. In other words, when you use the sound, you are the light, and the light is the sound. They are the same. Well, Allah is the essence of God, the heart of God, the very nature of God itself. You know, it's God, the compassionate, the essence, the soul, the very essence. The soul of a person is their essence. The soul of God, if you will, the essence of God is Allah. That's the name, the God. It's the essence, it's the heart. When you use that name, my understanding and what I see from my own witnessing is that name immediately brings out the essential light. So Allah becomes your door right into the essence itself. It brings forth that light because it is that light. And all the names bring forth their attributes. So Rahman brings forth the light of compassion itself, which is compassion. And the light of compassion itself makes the sound Ar-Rahman. They are the same. They're just different manifestations of the same thing. So if I want compassion and I want to manifest compassion and I say Ar-Rahman out of sacred language, it brings it forward. Now when I say compassion and I witness with my own witnessing with this, it touches compassion. I mean, it touches the pure light of compassion, but it doesn't bring the essence of it. It touches it. There's no question. Compassion, but there are many types of compassion. There are, good compassion, bad compassion, there's all types of compassion, but is it the essence? Am I in the pure initial impulse of compassion? I don't believe so. But when I say Rahman, the very essence of compassion appears to me. And that's how the sacred sound works. Sacred sound brings forth the essence, and the essence is the root, is the very root of the tree itself. It's the seed of the tree, and therefore within it, all the tree exists. So we get the full expression through that name.
That's fascinating, and I invite the listeners to make sure you tune in for our episode on sacred sound, which is coming later in the series. But for now, Ibrahim, thank you very much. This is a fascinating discussion.
You're very welcome, Wadude. Thank you, everyone. I hope you join us. Appreciate it.
It was a fascinating interview with Dr. Jaffe on the use of the qualities and the healing properties that they have. Be sure to go to our website. We have many resources there on sacred sound, and also share with us your experiences with the qualities or any reactions that you had to this particular episode. Remember, together we're changing the conversation of cancer from being a death sentence to the actual truth, which it's a unique opportunity for love and healing and transformation. Our next episode will be equally as interesting. We're going to explore some of the traditional therapies in the field of prophetic medicine. We'll be looking at the wet cupping, the use of the herbs, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this with you next time. So be sure to join us. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this episode on Sacred Sound and the Qur'an. We have posted supplemental materials for you: unedited, full-length recordings of our interviews with Amany and Mohamed, audio recordings of Mohamed reciting the healing verses from the Qur'an described in his interview, and a written document of the authentic authorized invocation. If you've already registered, you will receive links to these materials automatically. To receive access to all episodes and the supplemental course materials mentioned in this video, you must have registered for the program series. It's easy, free, and quick. If you haven't yet registered, please do so at the tiny URL shown on the screen. Everyone who is registered will receive access automatically to all of the course materials. Thank you.